They say be yourself, and they also say the self must be cultivated. One invites us to relax into who we already are, the other tells us to work on ourselves. Both are true, of course, but should we focus on being our authentic self or focus on becoming someone better? Hi, I'm really glad you're here. I'm Lucy, and welcome back to Wise Discrepancies, where we explore the seeming contradictions in the wisdom we're given and try to live a little more wisely in the space between. Be yourself. This saying is everywhere. It shows up in self-help books, social media, graduation speeches, life advice, and good friends. It tells us that who we are is already enough and that we don't need to perform or pretend. At its best, be yourself is about honesty and integrity. It's about learning to recognize our gifts, also our patterns, our desires, and our pain, and standing with it all without hiding. Philosophers and spiritual teachers have echoed versions of this for centuries, as we know. Socrates urged us to know thyself. Buddhism reminds us that suffering often comes from running from who we are. Zen wisdom says when you sit, just sit, and when you walk, just walk. A call to inhabit each moment without pretense. And I love that. Zen also teaches the value of steady, humble practice. There's a well-known saying, before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. In other words, growth isn't about big, fancy changes that's grandiose. It's about how we show up to our lives. In modern psychology, authenticity is strongly linked to well-being. As Brene Brown writes, authenticity is the daily practice of letting go of who we think we're supposed to be and embracing who we are. Psychologist Scott Barry Kaufman notes, authenticity is not about being true to a static self, but about the process of discovering who we are and striving toward our potential. So being authentic is good, but the self isn't fixed. There is no particular self I'm supposed to find and be. It's probably the case that knowing myself might be what opens the door to changing myself. Carl Rogers, one of the founders of humanistic psychology, said, the curious paradox is that when I accept myself just as I am, then I can change. This makes sense because I often find myself comparing myself to people in my demographic and others who are way more successful on all societal standards. And it's unhelpful, of course. It makes me want to curl up in a ball and just wallow in my behindness in life. And this feeling often tells me that I am not accepting myself. As Brene Brown reminds us, authenticity is a practice, a conscious choice of how we want to live. And that's where things get interesting, I think, because what does it mean to be yourself when the self is malleable and is shaped by so many forces like genetics, upbringing, culture, even friends we have? Philosopher Slavoj Žižek points out that searching for our quote-unquote true self might reveal nothing. Not because we're empty, well, maybe, but I think the meaning here is that the self is not a buried treasure to be found. It's a work in progress, always under construction. So maybe being yourself isn't about being a particular self, and you might agree that it's more about being honest about where I am now and what has shaped me up to this point. It's less about how other people see me and much more about the kind of relationship I have with myself. And now the other side, the self must be cultivated. This tells us that being human requires some effort, that we're not just given a self, we shape ourselves too. Aristotle believed that virtue was developed through practice. We become just by doing just acts. We become brave by acting bravely. The self then is formed through repetition, intention, care. Rolf Dobelli, in The Art of the Good Life, his book, cautions against raw authenticity as a virtue in itself. He doesn't believe it's a virtue in itself. He writes, authenticity without values and principles is just noise. What we owe to ourselves and to others is not impulsive expression, but the effort to cultivate character. And that cultivation, he suggests, is not a betrayal of the self, it's how we elevate the self. And cultivation, I think, is a fitting word because cultivation isn't about control, it's more about relationship. We don't force a tree to grow. We tend to it, water it, give it light, and protect it from harm as best we can. And we cultivate the self through reflection, therapy, reading, spiritual practice, nourishing friendships and experiences, and awareness, among other things. And being able to reach for what's good for us requires continuous honesty or integrity. As Martha Beck puts it in her book, The Way of Integrity, integrity is the cure for unhappiness, period, she said. That kind of integrity is in aligning your life with your truth. And Martha Beck argues that living in integrity this way can even protect us from physical illness and support healing. So maybe it's a loop. Only through being myself can I cultivate myself, and only through cultivating myself can I be myself, and so on. And as the Bhagavad Gita teaches, you have a right to your actions and not to the fruits of your actions. So the key word here is cultivation. Cultivation is about honoring the effort, our actions themselves, and not just the outcome. There's something beautiful in that. Even though we can't control who we were born as, our childhoods, or what we've been through, or even what we become, how we show up to our life now is still ours to tend to, even if it's just in terms of attitude. As Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor and psychiatrist, wrote, "Everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, and that is to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way." And even in Slavoj Žižek's view, where the quote-unquote true self might not exist as something discoverable, the work we put into shaping ourselves becomes part of who we are. We become whatever we are through exercising our will in ways that we choose. And as poet Hafiz wrote, what we speak becomes the house we live in. When I reflect on these two sayings, I find myself holding both, perhaps just like you. There are days I need to hear "be yourself," to stop trying to fix or perform or prove. Just breathe, just be. But there are also days where I know I've fallen into patterns that don't serve me, habits I want to outgrow. And for that, I need structure, discipline, practice, and pretty often therapy. In earlier episodes, I've talked about the value of stepping back from identifying too closely with every thought or label. And I think the same is true here. If I can hold a self lightly, I can both accept it and shape it. I can treat it like a pet I've adopted from the shelter, and I am gently training. Not something to scold constantly or to leave to its own devices, but to work with gently and consistently. A self that learns through repetition, kindness, and presence. And this to me feels like honesty, like truth and freedom in the acceptance of what is here and what I can do now. And of course, compassion for myself and then for others too. But when things are especially hard, when life has dealt us blows and we're stuck in terrible patterns of thinking and doing, all this can feel completely useless and impossible. And this brings us back to trust, a thread I'm finding weaves through a lot of wisdom. Trust that the self is not something you find, but something you meet now and again and again. Trust that being honest with yourself is a kind of discipline, and when that discipline is rooted in care, it's a form of self-love. Trust that authenticity doesn't mean being the same every day, it means just showing up sincerely even as we change. And trust that your effort to cultivate, to want to show up better, is an expression of authenticity and love, even if no one else sees it. So maybe it's not be yourself or cultivate the self. Maybe the wisdom is in learning how to do both, of course, with patience, sincerity, and care. What are your thoughts? Do you agree? If this helped you pause, reflect, or breathe a little deeper, do consider subscribing, because at the end of the day, we're all just trying to be as wise as we can, and wise truths are not usually clear-cut. And here's a mantra to take with you. May I meet myself with truth and shape myself with love. Thanks for listening. Until next time.